Donkey Kong over the years has proved to be very hard, to say the least. Be it in Mario Party and Smash or a variety of other games, DK is synonymous with this word. But what if it was all a flat-out lie? After conducting a thorough investigation, dissecting game data frame by frame, and consulting with the experts about the issue, I've compiled the shocking information that I'm about to share with you today. DK is known as a hard character, but what would the public think of him if he was exposed as soft? In today's video, we're going to try to figure out just how hard our boy Donkey Kong really was. We're going through every boss fight, assigning them each a rank, and then at the end answering the most burning questions in our society today. Like, was DK really that challenging throughout history? When was he the hardest overall? And when was it just not his day? What, you thought we were doing something different? I'm Cyroth, and it's time that we put some spotlight onto one of gaming's most popular characters. I'm going to be classifying each boss battle today into one of 4 simple categories: hard, pretty tough, not that bad, and very easy. This is just going to be based on how difficult I personally found the fight to be, combined with general fan consensus. By assigning a rank of sorts to every main Donkey Kong boss fight ever, we're going to get a pretty good grasp on just how hard he really was when we examine the results later on. Let's begin by breaking down Donkey Kong's first appearance in the aptly named arcade title, Donkey Kong. Man, times were quite a bit simpler with game names back then, now weren't they? The Donkey Kong that appears in this game, from a Mario lore perspective, is confirmed to have been a younger version of Cranky Kong, the grandfather of DK. I'm not gonna skip over this boss fight because of this piece of lore though. It is still technically a Donkey Kong boss fight. And if you want to complain about that, then again I invite you to look at the name on the side of the arcade machine. There are 4 levels in the original Donkey Kong that all get progressively more challenging the more times that you go through them. But because of their differences, they're all going to be given their own separate ranks today. And then they'll be averaged out later on in the video to determine how hard DK was in his inaugural appearance. These levels are 25 meters, 50 meters, the infamous 75 meters, although maybe not for the best reasons, and of course 100 meters. Let's begin with the first and most iconic level from the original Donkey Kong. Like the 3 levels that follow it, Mario, or technically Jumpman in this case, needs to climb up a series of ladders in order to reach Pauline. Donkey Kong famously throws several barrels at you in this stage, with the blue one in particular being very dangerous, because if a blue barrel goes into the oil drum, a fireball will attempt to hunt you down. You definitely don't want this to be the case, because with an arcade game, most of which have rough control schemes to say the least, the less distractions to deal with, the better. The hammers around 25 meters are obviously immensely helpful to destroy the barrels, and if used strategically, can definitely be your key to victory here. Now, while the first version of 25 meters can still be pretty challenging to the uninitiated, as you progress further and further into the game, striving for higher point scores, the barrels begin to move faster, and the difficulty continues to increase. Donkey Kong is an arcade game frequently referred to by critics as one of the most difficult of the time period, and I believe that the progression of the experience surrounding this famous stage in particular is a big reason why. It's difficult to give an overall rating due to the increasing difficulty, but overall I give 25 meters the ranking of hard. Next up is 50 meters, and I know that for many that played this in their childhood, they may not think of this as the second stage in the game, but that's mainly due to it being removed in certain versions of Donkey Kong, such as the famous one on the NES due to hardware limitations. Nevertheless, in the original Donkey Kong Japanese arcade game, this was the second stage. This level is based on a conveyor belt with these cement tubs that look more like pies than anything cycling around the stage. And our favorite fireball friends make a return as well. The main objective here is obviously to climb the ladders to get to the top, but one of the main problems occurs when DK beats his chest and the ladders disconnect, which can cause some challenges to occur. Overall, I give 50 meters the ranking of pretty tough, because there is some challenge here, but to me it isn't quite as bad as 25 meters. Up next, let's move on to everyone's favorite Smash Bros. Stage, 75 meters. But in the original Donkey Kong arcade game, is this stage just as annoying? Well, let's find out. In this stage, there are 2 elevators that have moving platforms, which can make things a lot trickier to move around in. Man, Sakurai and the team were pretty faithful with the adaptation, it looks like. The fireballs make a return in this stage, which can be an issue, but as long as you don't mess up your ascent too badly, they shouldn't be much of a problem. The main problem here is the springs. No, not those springs, these terrifying things. Known as jacks in the game, these are vicious spring-looking objects that are hurled across the stage by Donkey Kong. And yeah, they happen to fall right in the area that you need to jump through to get to the top. So many times has our beloved plumber perished in this spot, and even if he gets up to the top girder, you still gotta have some real patience to make sure that you don't fall to an additional shot of the spring. This level can cause some serious pain, especially in the later variations, which is why I give it the ranking of hard. Now onto this bad boy, 100 meters. Being the final final stage in the original version of the game, this one does not disappoint if you're looking for a challenge. The key difference with this stage compared to the others is that instead of just climbing to the top, disregarding any portions of the stage that you really didn't need to explore unless you're going for high scores, this one actually forces you to traverse through the entirety of the stage. This is because you must pull out the 8 bolts that keep Donkey Kong secured up at the top, and once you do, he'll fall down to his doom. But this seemingly simple task is a lot more difficult than you may expect. There's only one type of enemy that roams around throughout the stage, being the fires. Despite there being just one type though, it doesn't make the stage much less challenging. These guys chase after Mario and want nothing more than to see him dead, or as I like to call it, the current state of the Chibi Robo franchise. And it's because they have to navigate to each one of these bolts individually, it's going to get difficult at points to avoid these guys, even though there's a limit of 5 and even less with 4 in the NES version. Because of the big challenge imposed by this stage for those who aren't experts at grinding for high scores in the game, I'm assigning it a ranking of hard. Moving on to the next boss appearance of our unfriendly ape, when in Donkey Kong 3, get this, he's destroying a greenhouse and the exterminator named Stanley needs to stop him. You can't make this stuff up, guys, oh my god. There are 3 greenhouses, or levels if you prefer, that we have to go through here, which obviously means 3 boss fights to tackle and assign ranks to. Let's begin with the blue greenhouse. This one contains 3 floors where the primary goal is to shoot Donkey Kong to get him to the top of the screen. This goal is impeded in many ways because of the many bees and various other enemies that fly at you throughout this process. Sometimes they could get really overwhelming, and with one wrong move you'll get brutally punished, which causes there to be a large challenge in this level. I'll assign it the ranking of hard. Moving on to the yellow greenhouse, and right away you might notice some large differences compared to the blue one. There are only 2 floors this time, and the bugs are crawling across the vines, and I've got to admit, this one is significantly easier to me. You get clearer shots at DK most of the time, and in general it's way less hectic. The goal is to get him up to the top again, and this time his head will get stuck in a beehive, which must be painful to say the least. But due to the large decrease in difficulty, I've got to give this one a lower rating on the scale. It's not exactly a total breeze or anything like that, but it's not tough either. I'm gonna give it the grade of not that bad. With that being said, let's move on to the third one from this game, being the gray greenhouse. This one is very similar to the blue greenhouse, with one of the few main differences being this slight gap in the middle of the second floor. It's still not that much different overall though. The enemies are very similar, the layout is very similar, and it's gonna end up with a similar rating to the blue greenhouse because of all that. This is a hard level, bottom line. Next, we move on to a pretty underrated Game Boy title that not many people seem to talk about, being Donkey Kong 94. This game initially presents itself as a remake of the original arcade title, which it is for part of the experience, but that's kind of underselling it because there's a lot more to be found here that's entirely new. Because part of it's a remake of a game that we just covered, I'm not going to examine those particular boss encounters, but I will assign ranks to the entirely new ones so that we get an accurate idea of how difficult the new content actually was. And we'll be focusing on the final encounters with DK in each world. We've got quite a few to talk about here, so I'll have to go over them very briefly. In the first original world in the game, Big City, Donkey Kong throws barrels down and your job is to just block them and climb up to the top and throw them at him 3 times. You're rarely ever in danger as long as you pay attention due to how broken this ability is from Mario to block them. There's no other way to say it, this is a very easy fight. The fight in the forest, level 2-12, isn't much worse. It's very similar to the last fight, but there's springs involved and it's a bit more difficult to pick the barrels up. Still isn't enough to change the rating fully though, since the increase in difficulty is very marginal. This one was also easy. Moving on to the ship world, where in 3-8, you gotta get a hold of one of these barrels and climb all the way up to the top to hit DK 3 times. Overall, it wasn't that bad. Level 4-12 in the jungle world requires you to climb up vines and grab the barrels to hurl them back at Donkey Kong, but while some situations can be dangerous, most of it overall is not that bad. In 5-12, you're in a desert setting and DK is once again up at the top on a platform throwing enemies at you, but this time around you have to take them and throw them back at him. While the enemy aspect makes things a little bit different, it doesn't make things much more challenging. This fight was easy. In the airplane world 6-8 level, you fight DK when he's once again throwing barrels off of a high platform. There's wind blowing through the area and some springs involved, all designed to throw off your game when they can. This fight wasn't that bad. Moving on to level 7-12, when you're fighting DK in an icy cavern and the icebergs fall down on you while barrels are getting thrown at you as well. The ice makes them move in unexpected ways, which may end up throwing you off. While the level of difficulty is marginally higher, it's still not that bad. The level in the Rocky Mountains, being 8-16, is pretty unique as it features DK throwing rockets at you, which you must avoid at first, but then you have to go back up and hit him with them. Your ascent up to the top is hindered because of wind which returns, but the level layout is also different this time, making it a bit more challenging to get a hit off. And finally, we're at the last fight in the game. The final boss features you fighting a significantly larger version of Donkey Kong, and his disembodied hands are hindrances to you because they can smack the ground and stun you, leaving Mario vulnerable to the many objects that fall from the sky. Your goal goal is to grab the barrels and throw them at DK's head, but this might be the most difficult level in the game to accomplish that task. This fight was pretty tough. Now the next game that DK technically appears as a boss encounter in is Super Smash Bros. 64. Giant DK is present in technically every Smash game, however this is the only one where it's actually classified as a minor boss, so this is the only one that we'll be covering. However, it's difficult to classify how hard this fight is because there's actually a feature where you can change the difficulty of the single player modes, so it wouldn't really make much sense. Or maybe there's another way to go about this from a competitive perspective. The Giant DK can range from ridiculously easy to very challenging, and because of the influence that the player has over the difficulty of the fight, ranking it based on that isn't a good idea. Instead, we should rank this fight based on the competitive viability of the character compared to others in the game. In most community tier lists for Smash 64, Donkey Kong is listed in the lowest tier, however he's still above some other characters, meaning that he's not the worst of the worst. We'll give him the rank of not that bad for this game. Moving on to the next game, being Mario vs. Donkey Kong. This Game Boy Advance title, released in 2004, requires you to stop DK in a pretty similar way to Donkey Kong 94's fights. But how hard was it really to stop him here? In level 1 DK, you're tasked with throwing the appropriately colored trash cans at him, and this is incredibly simple to do. There isn't much danger since the debris that falls to damage you from above is mainly in the center, and you also will likely have a lot of lives from the mini Marios that you collect, so this is definitely an easy fight. In level 2-DK, you're tasked with knocking down fruit onto DK when he passes by. Very little danger and obviously very easy overall. In the third boss fight, DK throws barrels and what looks to be lava rocks down at you. There are some mix-ups involved with directions, so you'd like to be on your toes at points. This still wasn't that bad though. In 4-DK, there are 3 different colored sky guys and you need to throw the one of the right color at DK to hit him while the others try and attack you. It wasn't that bad. In the fifth fight, ball bombs are thrown at you across moving platforms and they're sometimes pretty difficult to grab onto while leaving enough time to carry it up high enough to hit DK with. I found this fight to be pretty tough. In 6-DK, you have to move around your half of the stage hitting switches to change the direction that the conveyor belts go so that you don't lose your ball bomb and it will go and hit Donkey Kong. This can be pretty tough at points since you need to move quickly and avoid getting hit by the lasers. Finally, when you get to the roof, the main final boss is reached, and this one is absolutely the most challenging in the game. You first have to rescue 3 toads, which isn't that bad, but then the fight begins to pick up. You're given 3 large barrels and have to hit Donkey Kong 3 times, every time he gets closer and closer to you, throwing more and more barrels. You'd think that it would help you out, but it actually has the opposite effect. Because he's so close to you, the barrels that he's throwing are arriving at your feet faster and faster, to the point where it becomes very challenging, especially in the last stage. This was a hard fight. Let's move on to the next fight now, tackling the main boss fights in Mario vs. Donkey Kong 2, March of the Minis. In the boss game of the Mushroom Mayhem world, you're tasked with firing your minis up to hit DK in the window that he pops out of. There's a lot of debris falling, and since this is a 2-screen experience, it can sometimes be harder to coordinate where it's going to fall. This still wasn't that bad though. In the Tropical Island world, it gets a little bit more challenging as DK throws bananas down at you and you have to aim your shots perfectly anticipating where he's going to move to in order to hit him with the coconuts. It might have been a harder fight had it not been for the likely large amount of lives that you're going to have at this point, so I'll stick with pretty tough for this one. In level 3, known as Pipeworks, there are various piranha plants that shoot fireballs at you and you have to avoid them while hitting DK 6 times with the mini Marios. This can be pretty tough at points. In the fourth boss game, DK is swinging back and forth and you've got to aim your mini Marios to the corners that they'll cause the donut blocks to hit his head. Because of the falling debris everywhere, this can be pretty tough. In the magma world, you have to shoot your minis into the air while avoiding the many flames. This one isn't that bad as long as you're patient. The sixth fight is very similar to the fourth, and I'd say marginally more difficult, but not enough to bump it up a level in the rankings because of the large amount of hits that you can take. It's still pretty tough though. In this spooky attic fight, there are 3 ghosts of sorts that you need to keep track of, and DK will be hidden underneath one of the cloths. You have to avoid enemies and fireballs throughout this process, making it pretty tough overall. In the 8th fight, things get pretty annoying as DK moves around the vines very quickly and there are some objects that you've got to avoid without much notice. It's also pretty tough. Getting to the final main fight of the game, it's a more traditional style Donkey Kong fight, except this time with the mini Marios. This one can get challenging at points, but it's also pretty easy at points as well, so I think in order to give an accurate balance here, we've got to go with pretty tough. Moving on to a pretty different game for a bit here, one that many wouldn't expect to see Donkey Kong in, but yeah, Punch-Out Wii happened. It's a fun encounter to see Donkey Kong as a boss fight here, and experiences fighting him tend to differ a lot throughout the community. Some consider this a hard fight, while some consider it an absolute pushover. I think it really depends on your playstyle overall, and as a balance here, we're going to give him the pretty tough ranking. Up next would be Minis March again, but the main changes made for that game from Mario vs. Donkey Kong 2 were in the form of the standard levels, leaving most of the bosses the same as we talked about before. And after that, Nintendo seemed to get the feeling that Donkey Kong was going to be a bit more of a protagonist for the series rather than anything anything else. Bowser had been the main villain for many years at this point, and Donkey Kong's role as the lead in this regard had come to an end. That was until his boss encounter in the most unexpected of circumstances. In an effort to prove that mirror mirror on the wall, he was really the hardest of them all, Donkey Kong returned in a boss role in Mario and Rabbids Kingdom Battle in 2017. This is in the form of Rabbid Kong, and hey, if Cranky Kong counts as a boss fight, we're gonna count this one too. He has some pretty powerful attacks that can blast you backwards, and one that'll do 50 damage if you're in close proximity to him for too long. You gotta be pretty strategic here, rather than having just good reaction times like the last boss fights I was talking about. This is a different type of difficulty, so I'll give it a pretty tough ranking. Moving on to the Donkey Kong Adventure DLC pack, where Rabbid Kong is the main antagonist this time around, and the standard DK is actually a character that you could play as. There are two fights here, the first of which is already ramping up the difficulty a bit. Mega Rabbid Kong will first fight you at the end of the jungle, attacking with Bananarangs and TNT barrels. I'm really not sure if I pronounced that right. Once his health is depleted, he'll be able to escape, leading to the next fight later on. I'll give this first fight the ranking of hard though. Up next is the final fight against Mega Rabbid Kong, and he brings back some of his powerful attacks from the last fight, while also adding some new ones on top of it. Wind is blown to push characters around, but he's also got this two-sided hammer which can be used to deal big damage. Most people paying for it are familiar with the standard gameplay and want more of it, so it makes sense to ramp up the difficulty like this. This was a hard fight. Moving on, we have Donkey Kong's final appearance as a boss as of right now, being in Super Mario Odyssey. He appears as a fun boss encounter in Odyssey that's kind of a climactic experience in the Metro Kingdom. This isn't too challenging though, but it doesn't necessarily need to be in order to justify its existence as a nice reference. In terms of how hard he was in this 2017 title though, it pales in comparison to the game that he made his debut in. This wasn't that bad. So now that we have a good idea of how hard DK was in every one of his unique boss appearances, what does this tell us about his overall hardness level? Well, I made a graph based on the average difficulty ranks that I gave per game, and we're going to try to decipher some patterns over the years. As you can see, there's definitely been a lot of fluctuation throughout this time. Donkey Kong, based on this data, appears to have been the hardest back in his original appearance, with 3 of the 4 levels being classified as hard. This is mainly due to the arcade control scheme and the scaling difficulty between levels though. Games back then were also a lot more punishing for a single mistake, because the arcade game locations obviously wanted players to lose often to get more and more people to be able to insert credits and be able to play the game, making them more money. The difficulty average after this then dramatically decreases until it finally rises to another high level in mid-2017. The one funny commonality that many would argue is that neither of these options are technically the main DK character that we know today. So if you're looking for the hardest boss fight of that iteration of the character specifically, you've either got to look at Punch-Out!, which many people disagree on, or you could maybe consider the boss fight in Smash 64 the hardest overall if you set it on the very hard difficulty setting. Bottom line is there's a lot of different ways that you can look at this, but I think what you can generally gather is that Donkey Kong wasn't always hard, his boss fights mainly arranged between the pretty tough and not that bad ratings, and that his most recent boss appearance is a total pushover, and he's anything but hard in that. But we could maybe go a little bit more recent, and if you want to open things up to some non-boss encounters, the real answer's gotta be Smash Ultimate, right? Thanks for watching, and I've gotta say thank you to the channel members, including the big contributor of this month, Jaro Bins. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more in this style in the future, consider leaving a comment down below telling me who you'd like to see next. Remember to subscribe and tick the bell icon if you're new to the channel and want to see more content like this on your way very soon. I'll see you next time.